It is a morning in Warsaw in September 1940, and the Germans are emptying the streets. Police and SS men have sealed the northern districts of the city: Żoliborz, Ochota, Kolonia Staszica. They are sweeping through apartment buildings, room by room, pulling out every man between the ages of 18 and 45. Before the day is over, they will have taken roughly 2,000 people. Inside a flat on Wojska Polskiego Street, one of those men hears them coming. He has a way out. The apartment contains a hidden compartment built for exactly this situation. A place a man can step into and simply not be there when the door opens. All he has to do is go in and wait, and the search will pass him by.
He doesn't go in. Instead, he walks to the door. When the Germans reach his flat, he is standing in the hallway with his papers held out. The documents identify him as Tomasz Serafinski, a civilian clerk. He offers no resistance. He goes with them into the trucks, into the stream of men being driven across the city to the Light Horse Guards barracks for processing. Here is the strange part. The man in the hallway was not a clerk named Serafinski. He was a cavalry captain in the Polish army, a decorated officer, a veteran of 2 wars. His real name was Witold Pilecki. And he had not just failed to escape the Germans that morning. He had walked out to meet them on purpose. He had been waiting for this roundup for weeks. He had chosen this apartment in this district because the Germans staged roundups here, because he needed to be caught. The trucks that collected him were not taking him to a prison where he would sit out the war. They were taking him to the place every man in that room was dreading: a camp the SS had opened a few months earlier at a town called Auschwitz, in the part of Poland annexed to the German Reich. The name the world would come to know? Auschwitz. Captain Witold Pilecki was walking into it deliberately. His orders were to find out what was really happening inside the camp, to build an underground army among the prisoners, to keep the outside world informed, and to come back out, alive, and testify. The plan was simple in its outline and insane in its practice. Step 1, get arrested. Step 2, survive a place designed to kill men in weeks. Step 3, escape. He had volunteered for all of it.
To understand why a man would volunteer for a death camp, you have to understand what Poland meant to him, and what it cost to belong to it. Witold Pilecki was born in 1901 in a town called Olonets in Karelia, inside the Russian Empire. He was born there because his family was in exile. Generations of Pileckis had risen up against the Tsar in the January Uprising of 1863, the most significant of the rebellions that flared across a Poland that had not existed on any map for more than a century. That is the first thing to know about Pilecki's world. For 123 years, Poland had been erased, carved up in 3 partitions between the Russian Empire, Prussia, and Austria. The country survived only in secret: underground schools, smuggled books, armed conspiracies that were always found out, always crushed. The Tsar's reprisals were brutal. Rebels were hanged. Estates were confiscated. Whole families were marched off to Siberia. The Pileckis were one of those families. A man named Joseph Pilecki spent 7 years in Siberian exile. The family estate near Novogrodak was largely taken from them. But Poland came back. In November 1918, at the end of the First World War, the Second Polish Republic was born, a country carved out of the ruins of 3 empires, on land its people had been fighting for since they were children. Pilecki grew up in Vilnius. He joined the Scouts, the underground Polish scouting movement, and learned, as every scout in occupied Polish lands learned, that loyalty to your country was a form of resistance. At 17, he was standing on the barricades of Vilnius, defending the city against the Bolsheviks at the Gate of Dawn. At 19, he was fighting the Red Army in the Polish-Soviet War, and in August 1920, at the Battle of Warsaw, he watched Poland stop the Soviet advance at the gates of its capital. That generation of young officers came out of those battles with a conviction that never left them. Poland existed because people were willing to die for it. Defense of the state was not a duty they performed. It was a moral obligation. It was the definition of who they were. In peacetime, Pilecki built a life. He took over his family's ruined estate at Sukorcze and rebuilt it with his own hands. He organized agricultural cooperatives, he started a dairy, he founded a volunteer fire brigade. In 1931, he married a schoolteacher named Maria Ostrovska. They had 2 children, Andrei and Zofia. On paper, he was an estate manager in a quiet corner of the countryside. Underneath, he was still an officer, waiting for the moment the map of Europe collapsed again. It came in 1939. In August of that year, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty with a secret clause. They agreed to divide Poland between them. On September 1st, Germany invaded from the west. On September 17, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Pilecki was mobilized as a cavalry platoon commander. Poland fought on 2 fronts at once, bravely, desperately, hopelessly. Within weeks, the country was gone. The government fled to London. What remained was the underground. In November 1939, in occupied Warsaw, Pilecki and a fellow officer, Major Jan Włodorkiewicz, founded the secret Polish army, the TAP. Pilecki was its chief of staff.
And then, in the summer of 1940, word began leaking out of a new camp in Upper Silesia. The Germans had built it that spring, at Oswiecim, an old Polish army barracks beside a railway junction, a place the SS could fill and empty at will. It was a prison for the people the Germans most wanted to remove from Poland: the intelligentsia, the military officers, the civic leaders, the clergy. The Gestapo had been rounding them up all across the country, and the existing prisons, Pawiak in Warsaw, Montelupich in Krakow, had overflowed. Auschwitz was built to hold the surplus. And prisoners were dying inside it. The death notices arriving at family doors told their own story. A father here, a brother there, dead within weeks of arrival. Among the men swallowed by the new camp were officers of Pilecki's own organization, Lieutenant Colonel Surmaki, Dr. Daring, men he knew personally.
What was happening behind that wire? No one knew. No one had gone in and come back out to say. In late August 1940, the leadership of the secret Polish army met to discuss it. They talked through the reports, the death notices, the rumors, and they reached a decision. The only way to know the truth about Auschwitz was to put a man inside it. His mission would have 4 parts: to gather intelligence on what was really happening, the conditions, the death rates, the methods, to organize the prisoners into an underground resistance, to keep morale alive and save lives, to build a channel for information to flow back out to Warsaw, and to prepare the prisoners to seize the camp in the moment the underground or the Allies attacked from outside.
Someone had to volunteer to walk into Auschwitz. Witold Pilecki volunteered. The mission had to be official, so Włodorkiewicz approved it, and the plan was endorsed by General Stephen Grot-Rowecki, the commander of the armed underground. Then came the mechanics of getting in. The underground had obtained the identity papers of a real Polish officer named Tomasz Serafiński. Pilecki took the name. He moved into the Żoliborz apartment on Wojska Polskiego Street, his sister-in-law's flat, chosen because the Germans ran regular roundups in the neighborhood. And then he waited. Hold on to this part, because it is easy to skip past. He did not need to do any of it. He could have spent the war in the underground, organizing, commanding, relatively safe, as the chief of staff of a resistance army.
Instead, he chose to walk into a German arrest and hand himself over to a camp that was eating men alive. He waited in that apartment for weeks, with the name of a dead man in his pocket, listening for the sirens. When they came, he was ready.
For 2 days, Pilecki was held with the other captured men at the Light Horse Guards barracks in Warsaw. The Germans beat prisoners, interrogated them, tested them, trying to find the underground officers hiding among the clerks. Pilecki held his cover. The name Serafiński held. On the night of September 21st, 1940, the prisoners were marched to the West Railway Station and loaded into unheated wooden freight cars. They traveled through the night, packed in the dark, until the train stopped at a rail siding in Auschwitz. The first thing they met was the fence, high-voltage wire, guard towers manned by the SS. Then the shouting, guards with whips and attack dogs driving the prisoners off the cars under floodlights. Then the intake, clothing taken, every hair on the body shaved, disinfected, registration, a striped canvas uniform with a number. Witold Pilecki became prisoner 48591. He wrote later that he had left behind everything he was familiar with on Earth and stepped into somewhere beyond it. Every detail of the intake was deliberate. The shaving, the stripping, the number in place of a name. All of it was designed to do one thing: erase the prisoner's identity before he understood what was happening to him.
A man who arrived as a professor, a mayor,
a cavalry captain, was made within hours into a number who could be beaten, starved, or killed without anyone outside ever knowing his name. Pilecki's number was 48591. He was one of the first transports from Warsaw. Behind him would come hundreds of thousands more. Here is the important thing about the camp in the autumn of 1940. Auschwitz was not yet the industrial extermination factory the world remembers. Himmler had ordered it built that spring, and its purpose was not mass murder by gas. It was imprisonment and terror, the physical breaking of Polish political prisoners through forced labor, starvation, and violence. The camp was designed so that a man would be worked to death, or beaten to death, or starved to death, and the machinery of that destruction ran around the clock. Roll call began at 4:30 in the morning. Prisoners stood in the open yard for hours, counted and recounted, in any weather. A man who collapsed was beaten or shot on the spot. The food was set below the level of survival. Bitter ersatz coffee, rotten vegetable soup, a small piece of heavy bread. Day-to-day authority over the prisoners was handed to German criminal prisoners, kapos, brought in from the Sachsenhausen camp, men given absolute power over work details, who could beat a prisoner to death and answer to no one. Executions were routine, carried out against a wall between two of the blocks that the prisoners called the Black Wall. Disease moved through the barracks faster than the SS could count. Typhus, dysentery, and in the medical blocks, exhausted prisoners were killed with lethal injections to the heart. Pilecki understood on his first day that survival was a matter of placement. Men assigned to the gravel pits and the road crews died fastest, endless hours in the open, under the weather, under the kapos clubs. A man who wanted to live needed indoor work, where there were shelter and sometimes access to food. Using contacts among the prisoners, he worked his way into a series of indoor assignments: the wood storage yard, the inmate hospital, and finally the camp bakery, a building outside the main fence where a night shift meant a measure of freedom. Even so, he nearly died. He caught a severe case of typhus. He survived because members of his network, working inside the inmate hospital, hid his illness, smuggled him medicine, and altered his records to keep the SS from selecting him for death. He wrote later, "The game which I was now playing in Auschwitz was dangerous. This sentence does not really convey the reality. In fact, I had gone far beyond what people in the real world would consider dangerous." The game. That is what he called it. And the game was organization. Within months of his arrival, Pilecki began building an underground army inside the camp. He called it the ZOW, the Military Organization Union. Its structure was designed for a place where one man, broken under torture, could destroy everything. The basic unit was the 5-man cell. A cell leader knew his 4 members, and one thing more: the identity of the single commander who had recruited him. The members of one cell knew nothing of the existence of another. If a man was arrested and the Gestapo's political department went to work on him, the damage stopped at 5. The secret could not be pulled out of a single throat. Pilecki ran the whole network from the center, passing orders through couriers, never revealing his true identity to most of his own soldiers. By 1942, ZOW had grown to more than 100 key operatives, placed in nearly every work detail, every block, every administrative office in the main camp, and in the new camp being built a short distance away, Auschwitz II, Birkenau. He did something else that was nearly impossible. Interwar Poland had been bitterly divided. Nationalists, socialists, agrarians, at each other's throats for 20 years. Inside Auschwitz, Pilecki brought those enemies together under a single command. He recruited Jan Malstorff, a leader of the nationalist movement, and Josef Sienkiewicz, a leader of the Socialist Party, into the same resistance. Men who would have been political adversaries outside the wire fought beside each other inside it. ZOW smuggled food, clothing, and medicine to the weak. It identified the informers who sold other prisoners to the SS and removed them. It documented everything: the SS personnel, the executions, the transports, the death counts. It trained men for the day the underground might come over the wire, and it built the channels to get the truth out. Early on, a small number of Polish political prisoners were released, freed through family intervention or bribes. ZOW sewed micro-written reports into the linings of their clothing, or had the reports memorized.
Polish civilian workers outside the fence served as drops. ZOW organized escapes specifically to smuggle documents out. And in 1942, using parts stolen from the SS's own workshops, ZOW technicians assembled a low-power shortwave radio transmitter hidden in the camp hospital and broadcast the camp statistics into the night for months until it was dismantled to keep the SS from locating it. The most famous smuggling operation happened on June 20th, 1942.
4 prisoners, one of them, Stanislav Gustav Jaster, an operative Pilecki had chosen personally, put on stolen SS uniforms, armed themselves with real weapons, climbed into the commandant's own open-top Steyr staff car, and drove out through the main gate. Jaster carried a detailed report written by Pilecki, sewn into his clothing. He reached Warsaw. He delivered the document to the Home Army Command. For the first time, the Western Allies held verified intelligence from inside Auschwitz, written by a man living in it. And then the story changed direction. Because while Pilecki was reporting on a brutal prison, the Germans were building something else. In 1942, Birkenau's gas chambers and crematoria came online. Transports began arriving from all over Europe. Jews, families, whole communities. And the camp became what history remembers, an industrial extermination center. Pilecki's reports documented it as it happened. His early transmissions recorded the experimental use of the gas Zyklon B in the basement of Block 11 on Soviet prisoners of war and incapacitated Polish prisoners.
Then the full machinery, the arrivals, the selections, the strip down, the gassing, the crematoria capable of burning more than 8,000 bodies a day. From March 1941, the Polish government in exile in London had been passing Pilecki's intelligence to the British Foreign Office and the United States State Department. His reports were specific. They named processes, places, numbers. The Western Allies did not believe them. Officials treated the accounts of industrial gassing as wartime propaganda, or as exaggeration born of suffering. Meanwhile, the Home Army weighed Pilecki's own proposal, an armed assault on Auschwitz itself. They studied it, and they rejected it. The German military presence in the region was overwhelming. Without Allied support, bombing of the SS barracks, strikes on the rail lines, airdrops, an uprising inside the camp would end with every prisoner dead. Pilecki's request to have the railways bombed was formally refused. The targets were too far. The war was elsewhere.
So there he was, a man who had volunteered to enter a death camp, who had built an underground army inside it, who had risked his life repeatedly to put the truth in front of the world. And the world had looked at it and done nothing. His reports were landing in London. The answer coming back was silence. He needed to make them listen, which meant he had to leave. By early 1943, Pilecki had run out of time inside the camp. The SS political department had sharpened its counterintelligence. Paid informers were hunting the resistance. Key ZOW officers were being arrested, taken to Block 11, tortured, and executed. And the SS had begun transferring long-term Polish political prisoners, the very core of ZOW, to camps deeper inside the Reich.
Gross-Rosen, Sachsenhausen, Mauthausen. Pilecki's name had to be close to the top of a list. If he was arrested, the mission ended. If he was transferred, it ended. There was one way left to make it matter. He would escape, not to save himself, but to stand in front of the Home Army Command in Warsaw and make the case for an attack on Auschwitz in person. The escape took planning. The bakery was the key. It sat outside the main camp fence, about 2 kilometers away, inside the town. Pilecki engineered his own transfer to the bakery detail, and through kapos connected to ZOW, arranged for 2 trusted operatives to join him, Jan Redze and Edward Cisielski, both prisoners, both ZOW men. All 3 were put on the night shift. On the night of April 26, 1943, 8 prisoners were locked inside the bakery with a handful of armed SS guards for the overnight baking shift. The 3 escapees wore civilian clothes beneath their striped uniforms. They had false papers, they had money, they had a chemical powder meant to confuse tracking dogs, and they carried cyanide capsules in case everything went wrong. At about 2 in the morning, one SS guard was asleep. The other was momentarily distracted. Cisielski cut the building's telephone and alarm wires with hidden wire cutters. Redze, who had made a bump key ahead of time, worked the lock of the heavy main door, then unscrewed the retaining nut and pushed the securing hook out of its frame. Pilecki and Redze put their shoulders to the door and forced it outward. Cieselski held the inner door shut, blocking the line of sight of the guard nearby. They slipped outside, pulled the door closed behind them, and jammed an iron bar through the outer handles, locking the SS guards inside the building. The guards understood what had happened and opened fire through the windows. 9 shots went into the darkness. None of them hit the 3 men running for the night. Pilecki wrote of the moment they cleared the building, a hit of a chilly breeze on heated heads, as the stars winked at us.
Then came the long part. The 3 escapees crossed the Sola River, then crossed the Vistula in a small boat they found on the bank, then moved on foot through dense forest, dodging German patrols for 100 kilometers across occupied southern Poland. They traveled by night and hid by day. And the men who would later read Pilecki's account of those weeks would find, between the escapes, 100 details of the ordinary world he had been cut off from for 3 years. The fields, the farmhouses, the frightened generosity of strangers who took in 3 men in striped rags. In one brush with a patrol in the woods, Pilecki was shot in the arm. He kept going. After a week of travel, they reached the town of Bochnia and made contact with the local Home Army. Pilecki rested and recovered, then went on to Warsaw. In August 1943, he reported in person to the high command of the Home Army, the first man to walk out of Auschwitz and deliver face-to-face the truth of what was happening inside it. He made his case. He had the evidence. He had the plan. He asked them to come and take the camp. And once more, they said no. The reasons were the same, and they were sound, and they were devastating. The men in Warsaw did not doubt him. They simply could not help him. An assault without Allied support would kill every prisoner he had come to save. Pilecki had done everything a man could do. He had volunteered to enter Auschwitz. He had built an underground army inside it. He had smuggled out the evidence. He had escaped with his life to deliver it personally. And the answer remained no. The truth was out. The truth was not going to change the war. He stayed in Warsaw and kept working.
Pilecki was given a place in the intelligence section of the Home Army. He was also drawn into a deeper project, an organization called NI, which stood for Independence. Its purpose was to prepare a secret underground to keep resisting after the Red Army reached Poland. Pilecki and the men around him understood that Poland's survival was not guaranteed by Hitler's defeat. Poland had been swallowed by the East before. They were building the answer to the next occupation. On August 1st, 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began. The Home Army rose against the Germans across the capital, hoping to liberate the city before the Soviets arrived. Because of his secret role in NI, Pilecki was ordered to stay out of the fighting. He did not. He joined the battle as a private soldier, under an alias, on the barricades.
When his leadership became impossible to hide, he revealed his rank and took command of a fortified sector near the postal railway station, a stronghold the fighters came to call Reduta Witold, Witold's redoubt. His men held it against German artillery, armor, and infantry assaults day after day until the uprising was crushed. The city capitulated on October 2nd, 1944. The Germans took the Home Army prisoners. Pilecki, as a uniformed officer, went into the prisoner of war system, Stalag 8B in Silesia, then Oflag 7A in Bavaria. In the officers' camp, the younger prisoners called him Daddy. He kept morale up. He looked after the men who were coming apart. When the American 12th Armored Division liberated the camp on April 29, 1945, he walked out of his 3rd prison.
The war in Europe was over. The mission, the second mission, the one he had escaped Auschwitz to complete, was not. In July 1945, he made his way to Italy and the Polish Second Corps under General Władysław Anders. There he wrote the final version of his report, the full account of his mission, more than 100 pages long, the document that became the definitive record of Auschwitz from the inside. It was the work of a man who had done exactly what he set out to do. He had gone in. He had seen. He had organized. He had escaped. He had told.
And then the map of Europe was redrawn behind his back. At the Yalta Conference, the Allies assigned Poland to the Soviet sphere of influence. A communist government was installed in Warsaw, supervised by the NKVD. The men who had spent 6 years fighting for Polish independence, the Home Army, the underground, the officers in the West, became in their own country
the enemy. The new authorities were hunting them down, liquidating them, burying them in unmarked graves. General Anders gave Pilecki one last order. Go back into Poland. Take a false name, Roman Jezierski. Build an intelligence network. Find out what the Soviets were doing, their military deployments, the NKVD's repressions, the liquidation of Home Army men, the slow Sovietization of Polish life. Report to the government in exile in London. Pilecki obeyed. He went home. He built the network. He sent the reports. By late 1946, the communist secret police had him in their sights. Their operation to find him had a code name, Klostor, the monastery. His network was compromised. He was warned. He was ordered to flee to Western Europe. He stayed.
On May 8, 1947, the secret police arrested him in Warsaw. He was taken to the detention prison on Rakowiecka Street in the Mokotów district. For 10 months, the interrogators went to work on him, under Józef Różański, the head of the investigative bureau, and carried out by an interrogator named Eugeniusz Chimczak. They pulled out his fingernails. They broke his bones. They kept him from sleeping for days at a time. They beat him.
Toward the end, his wife Maria was allowed one brief visit. He looked at her and said that Auschwitz had been just a game compared to what the interrogators were doing to him now. The trial that followed was staged. On March 3, 1948, the case of the Witold group opened before the military district court in Warsaw. He was charged with treason, with running an espionage network for General Anders and the Western intelligence services, with planning the assassination of communist officials, with illegal possession of firearms. He was denied proper counsel. He was forbidden to call his own witnesses. He was made to sign statements written under torture. On May 15, 1948, the court sentenced him to death. Clemency petitions went to the communist leadership. Bolesław Bierut, the head of the party, rejected them.
And Prime Minister Józef Cyrankiewicz, the same Cyrankiewicz who had been a prisoner in Auschwitz, who had worked in the camp resistance, whose standing as a man who had survived the camps made him useful to the new state, wrote an official letter declaring Pilecki an enemy of the state. He refused to intervene. The execution was confirmed. On the evening of May 25, 1948, at 9:30, they took Witold Pilecki to the basement of Mokotów prison. The prison's executioner, Peter Śmietanski, killed him with a single shot to the back of the head. His body was buried secretly in an unmarked grave, most likely in the Lanka field of Warsaw's Pawonsky Military Cemetery, alongside the other executed men, whose names the regime wanted erased. His family was not told he was dead. For 41 years, the communist regime did everything it could to make Witold Pilecki disappear a second time. It censored his name. It scrubbed him from the archives, from the histories, from public memory.
Anything that mentioned him was suppressed. His wife and children were subjected to state discrimination, the family of a traitor who had never been permitted to die publicly. The man who had volunteered to enter Auschwitz and brought out its earliest detailed testimony was erased by his own country for more than 4 decades. And here is the thing neither regime could fix. He was a witness. He had put the facts into motion. The reports he wrote inside the camp and the report he wrote after the war existed. They could not be unwritten. And once the censors were gone, they could be read by historians, by school children, by a country finally allowed to know its own dead. In 1989, the regime fell. The archives opened, the story came out. In 1990, the Supreme Court of Poland reviewed the 1948 proceedings. On October 1, it annulled the conviction completely. Witold Pilecki was innocent of every charge. The sentence had been murder. The honors followed. The Commander's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta in 1995. The first critical edition of his report in 2000.
In 2006, Poland's highest honor, the Order of the White Eagle. In 2013, the rank he had earned decades before, awarded posthumously, Colonel. The British historian M.R.D. Foote, who devoted a career to the study of resistance, placed Pilecki among what he called the 6 bravest resistance fighters of the Second World War. The chief rabbi of Poland, Michael Szudrzyk, put it differently. When God created the human being, God had in mind that we should all be like Captain Witold Pilecki, of blessed memory. Some of the legends that grew around Pilecki deserve to be handled carefully, because the truth is more useful than the myth.
It is sometimes said that Sienkiewicz fabricated his own resistance record and stole Pilecki's reports to cover it up. The historians of the Auschwitz Museum find no evidence of that. Sienkiewicz was active in the camp resistance, but in a different network, the left-wing Kampfgruppe, not Pilecki's Zau. He did not steal the reports.
His responsibility in Pilecki's death, however, is documented. As prime minister, he refused to intervene, endorsed the sentence, and allowed the regime to bury Pilecki's legacy along with his body. It is sometimes said that Pilecki was a lone volunteer, acting on his own. He was not. The mission was an official intelligence operation, planned by the leadership of the secret Polish army, authorized by its commander, endorsed by the high command of the armed underground. Pilecki was a disciplined soldier, executing an order. That he volunteered for the order makes his act more remarkable, not less. And it is sometimes said that he wrote the first report on the Holocaust. The claim needs precision. His early reports documented Auschwitz as it was in 1940 and 1941, a brutal prison for Polish political prisoners, because that is what it was. When the extermination machinery came online in 1942, his reporting was among the earliest to document it, complementing the accounts that followed from the escapes of Tabo, Verba, and Wetzlar, which together reached the West as the Auschwitz Protocols.
He watched the place change, and he wrote down what he saw. So, what was the point of it all? Judged as a military operation, the mission failed. The camp was never bombed. The assault never came. The machinery kept running to the end of the war. But that is not the only way to judge it. Consider what Pilecki did, taken as a whole.
He volunteered to enter a place where the average prisoner was expected to survive for weeks. He built an organization that gave thousands of doomed people something worth holding on to, a structure, a purpose, a reason to keep living. He carried evidence of a crime the world refused to believe, out from under the wire. And when his own countrymen were handed to a second totalitarian power, he went back into the same kind of danger, because someone had to witness that too. They shot him for it in the end. They hid his body. They scrubbed his name. But the testimony was already out, and that is the one thing both of the regimes that tried to silence him could never take back. Witold Pilecki walked into the darkest place of the 20th century with his eyes open, on purpose. He came out. He told the world.
And in telling it, he proved something the empires and the police states could never quite manage to erase, that the truth can be carried out of any prison by a man willing to walk in first.